My sister broke the one rule. I had an almost unalived my family, then showed up at dinner with a glass of wine. When I asked why she won't stop, she said, "He's still breathing, isn't he?" That was 10 months ago. Today, she was screaming my name through the Ring camera begging me to stop. My sister and I have always had an okay at best relationship. We never talked, but we never fought either. We never shared clothes, never talked about boys, never did anything like that. Whenever it was just us two, the air was filled with awkward silence, which neither of us cared enough to break. But that all changed when she turned 21 because the second she took her first sip of beer, everything changed. She went from drinking monthly to weekly to daily. It felt crushing seeing her delve deeper and deeper. And what was even worse was when she tried to drag me down with her. I never liked alcohol and wanted to stay away from it, but she bullied and coerced me into it. On her 20th birthday, she gave me a bottle of water that was actually straight vodka. And when I spat it out and started coughing, I looked up to see her recording my reaction and laughing. I gave her one final chance after that. I told her if she tried to drag me into drinking again, I would cut her off. Well, a month later, it was her and her boyfriends. They invited me out with them, and my sister promised not to ask me to drink with her. Of course, she lied. Throughout the whole night, she kept giving me extremely diluted drinks that I didn't even realize had alcohol in them. Some vodka, whiskey, even rum. I remember feeling a light buzz after my third drink and the world started spinning. This was the first time I was intoxicated. I clung to her asking what was wrong with me, but she just laughed and because she was tipsy herself, admitted what she had done. I don't remember the specifics. All I remember is being enraged. I called a cab on the spot, and once home I sent her a voice note telling her I never want to see her again. What's even more insane is that she called me a week later, blaming me for ruining her party because everyone looked at her like she was an eye-hole after finding out why I left. I didn't even respond, just hung up. Life went on without her. I soon met the love of my life. We got engaged, got married, my sister wasn't invited, never even attempted to reach out. But then, coincidentally, when I was pregnant, she sent me a message. She said she saw my Facebook post about having a baby with my husband on one of her friends' accounts, and seeing it made her realize nothing is more important than family. She apologized and begged for another chance. I was very reluctant, but eventually agreed. We met up for coffee at a little brunch spot. And even though she was nice and apologetic, she still had 3 glasses of wine, which let me know she was still drinking regularly. I asked about it, and she said alcohol was a part of her life she never wishes to give up. But she did promise that if let her back into my life, she'd never drag me into drinking again. I thought long and hard about it, and I agreed. I wasn't sure what to expect, but everything actually went fine. She respected my boundaries, never asked me to drink, and never got more than tipsy in front of me. But then last week, she came over to my house, and that was when I realized resuming contact with her was the worst thing I could have done. This was the first time I'd let her come over after my baby's birth. I had warned her that she wasn't allowed to go near the baby if she drank, and she told me that was no problem. I still had a bad gut feeling about it, but the last year gave me good reason to trust her. So I pushed my worries away, but then she came over with 2 bottles of wine. We all had a pleasant chat, and even my husband had a glass. I, however, did not drink. My sister almost finished the 2 entire bottles herself and was quite hammered. Still, the evening was going okay, but then she asked to use the bathroom. I pointed her upstairs and after waiting a few minutes, I went to check on her to make sure she wasn't getting sick. But when I went up, she wasn't in the bathroom. She was in our room, sitting on our bed, wasted out of her mind, holding my baby. The second she saw me, she panicked and quickly stood up to give him to me. But as she was standing up, she lost balance. She fell and dropped my baby. He fell on the floor. I screamed and went to check up on him. Thankfully, he hadn't fallen from a notable height. He was crying, but seemed to have no major injuries or anything, which I thank my lucky stars for. My sister got up and started apologizing, and I just called my husband. I told him to hold our baby and dragged my sisters downstairs and outside to speak to her. I told her that I had one rule: under no circumstance could she get near the baby while drunk. And while drunk, she decided to hold him, then dropped him. She kept apologizing, but I called her a taxi home saying I never wanted to speak to her again. That, however, turned out to be a mistake. Because as it turned out, she had done more than just drop my baby. She had fed him the remainder of her wine bottle, and he was currently upstairs, throwing up, while my husband was crying and calling the hospital. The next few hours were a blur of panic. The ambulance took us to the emergency room where doctors confirmed alcohol poisoning in my infant son. They ran tests to check for other complications while David and I paced the waiting room terrified we might lose our baby because of my sister's reckless behavior. The medical staff worked efficiently, but their grave expressions did nothing to ease our fears as they monitored our son's vital signs and took blood samples. The hospital social worker interviewed us extensively, looking suspicious when we explained how our son had ingested alcohol. I could see in her eyes that she thought we might be covering something up. They started a mandatory child welfare investigation, making us feel like criminals when we were the victims. We had to answer the same questions repeatedly, describing the incident in excruciating detail while our baby received treatment in another room. I tried calling Megan repeatedly during this nightmare, but she wouldn't answer. Texts went unread, voicemails unheard. She had simply vanished after the ambulance took us away. David had made her leave our house, but we expected at least a call to check if Jackson was all right. Her complete disappearance only confirmed that deep down, she knew the gravity of what she'd done. After an agonizing night at the hospital, the doctors finally told us Jackson would be okay. There was no permanent damage detected, though they warned us that even small amounts of alcohol could potentially cause developmental issues that might not be immediately apparent. We'd need to monitor him closely and bring him for follow-up appointments. The relief nearly buckled my knees, and David and I clung to each other, sobbing with gratitude that our son had escaped serious harm. When we brought Jackson home the next day, I was filled with equal parts relief and rage. My sister had endangered my child's life and then disappeared without taking any responsibility. That afternoon, while Jackson napped under David's watchful eye, I drove to Megan's apartment running on adrenaline and no sleep. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel as I rehearsed what I would say, determined to make her understand the consequences of her actions. I pounded on her door until her boyfriend Thomas answered, looking hungover and confused. He claimed Megan wasn't there and hadn't come home last night after visiting us. I showed him photos of Jackson in the hospital and explained what happened. The color drained from his face. His shock seemed genuine, suggesting Megan hadn't even told him what had transpired. "She's been getting worse," he admitted, drinking more than ever. "I've tried to help, but you make excuses for her." I finished his sentence. "You're enabling her, and she almost killed my baby yesterday." The words came out sharp and clear, cutting through whatever defense he might have been preparing. He denied this, saying she'd been through tough times that I didn't understand. I lost it then, telling him exactly what I thought of both of them. Before leaving, I made it crystal clear. If either of them came near my family again, I'd have them arrested. His stammered apologies followed me down the hallway, but they meant nothing compared to my baby's safety. Back home, I found David holding Jackson, who was thankfully sleeping peacefully. We agreed immediately. My sister was permanently cut from our lives. We blocked her number, social media accounts, and email addresses. We installed a simple security camera at our front door. We documented everything that had happened for potential legal action if necessary. The decisions came easily. Our son's safety was non-negotiable. For a week, we focused solely on Jackson's recovery, taking turns monitoring him day and night. He seemed to be bouncing back well, showing no lasting effects from the ordeal. We were just starting to breathe easier when my phone exploded with messages from relatives. Megan had posted a tearful, clearly intoxicated video online claiming I was keeping her from her nephew out of spite. She described herself as a loving aunt who made one tiny mistake and was now being cruelly punished. The video had prompted a flood of family members to contact me, demanding to know why I was being so harsh to my clearly remorseful sister. Some even suggested I was using this incident as an excuse to continue our long-standing feud, as though protecting my child was merely a vindictive act. I couldn't believe it. She had endangered my child's life, disappeared for a week, and then tried to paint herself as the victim. When I attempted to privately message key family members with the truth, I discovered Megan had preemptively told them that I was exaggerating and that Jackson had just accidentally sipped from her glass. Several relatives were now convinced I was overreacting to punish my sister. Their willingness to believe her version of events without even hearing mine was deeply painful, revealing fault lines in our family I hadn't fully appreciated before. Yesterday, we received a formal-looking letter from Megan claiming she'd entered rehab, and her therapist recommended family healing as part of her recovery process. She wanted visitation rights with Jackson once she completed the program. David suggested we verify this sudden rehabilitation, so I called the facility she named. It didn't exist. I'm sitting here now, looking at my beautiful baby boy sleeping in his crib, wondering how my own sister could first endanger his life and then lie so blatantly to manipulate her way back into our lives. David wants to get a restraining order, but some family members are already calling us heartless for not giving her another chance. The division among our relatives has added another layer of stress to an already traumatic situation. Am I wrong to permanently cut my sister off after what she did? How do I protect my son from both her and the family members who seem blind to the danger she poses? I never imagined becoming a mother would mean defending my child from my own sister, but here we are. Every parenting book I read prepared me for sleepless nights and feeding challenges. None prepared me for having to shield my infant from someone who should have loved and protected him as family. The next day, I called Jordan, a friend who worked as a detective who had helped us with some minor issues in the past. I needed advice about restraining orders and what evidence we'd need. He came over during his lunch break and reviewed everything we had so far. Look, I'm going to be straight with you, Jordan said after looking at our documentation. Getting a restraining order isn't impossible, but judges typically need more than one incident to establish a pattern of behavior. I showed him the fake rehab letter, the social media posts, and played the drunken video Megan had posted. His expression grew more serious with each piece of evidence. Document everything, he advised. Every text, every call, every social media post. Set up cameras if you can afford them. And most importantly, don't engage with her directly. After he left, I set up a separate email account just for documenting Megan's harassment. I forwarded all the messages from relatives, screenshots of her social media posts, and wrote a detailed account of what happened with Jackson while it was still fresh in my mind. David installed additional security cameras covering our backyard and driveway. That night, we got our first alert from the front door camera. I checked the footage expecting a package delivery or something innocent. Instead, I saw Megan stumbling up our walkway at 11:30 p.m., clearly intoxicated, with a bouquet of flowers and a teddy bear. She rang the doorbell repeatedly, then sat on our porch for nearly 20 minutes before leaving the items with a note. David went out to retrieve them when she was gone. The note read, "I'm so sorry for the misunderstanding. Please let me see my nephew. He needs his auntie in his life. Love, Meg." The flowers reeked of cigarette smoke and alcohol like she'd brought them straight from a bar. I added this incident to our documentation file and threw everything in the trash. The fact that she'd come to our home drunk just proved she hadn't changed at all. The next morning, I called our pediatrician to warn them that Megan might try to access Jackson's medical records. They added a note to his file requiring additional verification for any information requests. Later that day, I received a call from the pediatrician's office. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Stacy from Dr. Peterson's office. I wanted to let you know that someone claiming to be your sister called requesting copies of Jackson's records. Following your instructions, we declined to release any information." My blood ran cold. Did she say why she wanted them? She said she was helping you gather documentation for a specialist consultation. When we asked for the authorization form you supposedly signed, she hung up. I thanked Stacy for the call and immediately contacted Jordan again. He said this strengthened our case, but still wasn't quite enough for an emergency restraining order. He suggested we notify Jackson's future daycare about the situation. The following day, David and I visited Little Explorers Daycare where we'd planned to enroll Jackson when I returned to work. As we explained our situation to the manager, Karma, her expression shifted from professional politeness to concern. "Actually," she said hesitantly, "someone matching your sister's description was here yesterday asking about enrollment procedures. She said she was thinking of registering her nephew and wanted to tour the facility." The realization that Megan was tracking our movements so closely made me physically ill. We showed Karma a photo of Megan and she confirmed it was the same person. We immediately decided against using that daycare and began researching home-based nanny options instead. That weekend, my mother called to invite us to Sunday dinner. "Dad and I miss you all so much," she said. "We promise Megan won't be there. We just want to see our grandson and talk through everything calmly." After discussing it with David, we cautiously agreed. This would be the first time my parents had seen Jackson since the incident. And despite everything, I didn't want to deprive them of a relationship with their grandson if Megan truly wouldn't be present. We arrived at my parents' house around 4 p.m. Mom greeted us with teary hugs, cooing over Jackson who was awake and alert in his carrier. Dad gave David a firm handshake and kissed my cheek. Everything seemed normal as we settled in the living room. Jackson on a blanket for tummy time while Mom brought out coffee and cookies. Then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of my sister's laugh coming from the kitchen. My whole body tensed. "Who else is here?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Before Mom could respond, Megan walked in from the kitchen holding a glass of wine. "Surprise," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I thought we could finally talk things out." I didn't say a word. I simply picked up Jackson, grabbed the diaper bag, and walked straight to the door. I heard David behind me saying something to my parents about trust being broken, but I was already strapping Jackson into his car seat, my hands shaking with anger and betrayal. I drove home alone while David stayed behind to confront my parents about their deception. When he returned an hour later, his expression was grim. "They admitted they set up the whole thing," he said, pacing our living room. "They thought if they could just get us all in the same room, we'd talk it out and everything would be fixed." "Did they say anything else?" "Yeah. And you're not going to like it. Megan's been living with them for the past 3 weeks. Apparently, Thomas kicked her out after learning what she did to Jackson." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My parents had lied to our faces while harboring the person who had endangered their own grandson. The depth of their betrayal was incomprehensible to me. I cried that night for the family I thought I had while David held me and promised we'd get through this together. The next morning, I sent a simple text to my parents. "We need space from all of you right now. Please respect that." Then I blocked their numbers. David did the same. We needed time to process this betrayal and figure out our next steps without the constant pressure from my family. For a few days, things were quiet. We settled into a routine with Jackson who was thriving despite everything. I focused on enjoying my maternity leave with him, trying to put the Megan situation out of my mind as much as possible. David returned to work, though he called to check in more frequently than before. On Thursday, I decided to venture out to the grocery store with Jackson. It was our first trip out together that wasn't a doctor's appointment, and I was feeling confident as a new mom. I put Jackson in his carrier, which I placed securely in the shopping cart, and began making my way through the store. I was in the produce section selecting apples when I felt that unmistakable sensation of being watched. I turned to see Megan at the end of the aisle, pretending to examine a display of oranges while clearly tracking my movements. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away, acting as if she hadn't seen me. My heart raced. This couldn't be a coincidence. This was our local store, far from my parents' house where she was saying, she must have followed me here. I abandoned my half-filled cart and headed straight for the exit, clutching Jackson's carrier tightly. In the parking lot, I scanned for Megan but didn't see her. I quickly secured Jackson in the car and drove home, checking my rearview mirror constantly. Once home, I had a full-blown panic attack. My first ever. I couldn't catch my breath. My heart was racing, and I was convinced Megan was going to appear at any moment. I called David at work, barely able to speak coherently. He came home immediately to find me still shaking. Jackson thankfully napping peacefully in his bassinet. "We need legal help," David said once I'd calmed down. "This is stalking." The next day, we consulted with Jordan again, who agreed we needed to pursue a restraining order more aggressively. He reviewed our documentation and explained our options. For a restraining order, we typically need evidence of threats or harassment. He explained. Following you in a grocery store is concerning, but difficult to prove as intentional harassment. Courts generally want to see a pattern of behavior that would make a reasonable person fear for their safety. So there's nothing we can do? David asked, frustration evident in his voice. I didn't say that, Jordan replied. Start documenting everything. Times, dates, locations, set up more cameras. If she keeps showing up where you are, that builds our case, and don't respond to any contact attempts. That can be used against you to argue the contact was welcome. We left Jordan's office with a plan. We would document meticulously, avoid all contact, and build our case. It wasn't the immediate solution we wanted, but it was something. Over the next week, Megan escalated her attempts to contact us. She created new email addresses to bypass our blocks, sent daily messages about her recovery journey, and left voicemails asking for just 5 minutes with Jackson. Each message started sympathetically enough, but inevitably included subtle guilt trips and manipulative language. I know you're just trying to protect Jackson, one voicemail said. But do you really want him growing up without knowing his aunt who loves him so much? Don't you remember how much you loved spending time with Aunt Patty when we were kids? I saved everything without responding. With each message, her tone gradually shifted from pleading to demanding. From I understand why you're upset to you're being unreasonable, and you can't keep him from me forever. 2 weeks after the grocery store incident, our newly hired nanny, Jessica, reported something disturbing. While taking Jackson for a walk in the neighborhood, she noticed the same car circling the block 3 times. She couldn't identify the driver, but the behavior was concerning enough that she cut the walk short and returned to our house. I'm probably being paranoid, Jessica said. But with everything you've told me about your sister, I didn't want to take any chances. We thanked her for her vigilance and decided to invest in a GPS tracking device for the stroller. It felt ridiculous. What parent has to track their baby's stroller because of their own sibling? But we were taking no chances with Jackson's safety. The next day, I received a troubling call from Dakota, a mutual childhood friend who still had occasional contact with Megan. I don't want to alarm you, Dakota said, but Megan's been asking me some weird questions. She wanted to know what time you usually put the baby down for naps and if